So I'm Jenny Graupes. You've heard my name now 10 times, so you remember it. I always like to start with something a little more spare so I can sort of warm myself up but also warm you up to the experience of hearing poetry. So this first piece is called Ornaments of Providence and Welded Water. Sunny December snowshine, 2 p.m. I'm exhausted by the dead, the feeling of waking up all day. I drink a sunlit whiskey, a belt of coal right through me. Instead of a hot air balloon, I have a cardinal in melted bird bath water, like a well-meaning professor saying, morning. The calm of giving in. I poke at the ice tray, disrupt a cube. Remembered names, like black holes folded into hand-passed notes. Oh, mailman, I never offer you a drink, though I know your 1,000 boxes are spots on a bush where berries grow. If someone dies or moves away, you'll find another berry in the same place. A handful of snow would supernova in my whiskey. Somewhere the parrot and the aloe will outlive me beautifully. The mailman pulls away, and above, the sky slow churns icily. Crosses like freezer gin, a cold pilot light lit. Okay, and the next poem I'm going to read is actually, it's broken up all over the page. I was reading Emerson's Montaigne and the Skeptic, and I took a chunk of Emerson's language and broke it down and sort of tried to work my way into my own words. And someone asked me to read this, so I was happy to have this suggestion. And I'll read the Emerson quote first. This is called Heeding the Half Sentence. The sincerity and marrow of the man reaches to his sentences. Cut these words and they would bleed. They are vascular and alive. One has the same pleasure in it that he feels in listening to the necessary speech of men about their work, when any unusual circumstance gives momentary importance to the dialogue. For blacksmiths and teamsters do not trip up in their speech. It is a shower of bullets. It is Cambridge men who correct themselves and begin again at every half sentence, and, moreover, will pun and refine too much and swerve from the matter to the expression. The sincerity to begin again at every half sentence, marrow of the man, listening to the necessary speech of men trip in their speech. It is a shower of bullets, reaches to his sentences, pleasure in it that he feels in listening, blacksmiths and teamsters, at every half sentence, any unusual circumstance, cut these words and they, about their work, correct themselves, bleed. They are vascular and alive in listening. The Andes are stars and stars are guesswork and account for the dimming of lights. Listen harder. Bleed, hold off for the solar spool, vascular, sun code, a prisoner of the edge-wild galaxy. At the moment of fear, the beast is a main body. Conditioned air is closed air, like Stevens saying, order is a season. A surgeon's hands in their last days delete the body's parts no more, whispering order. At the moment of fear, bleed, no unusual circumstance. At every half sentence, a singing bridge. Thoreau like, the music is constant. Listen harder. It is hard to keep the boiling river, its banks, rivers. The canine cloud has no iris, alive in listening to the necessary rivers, banks, riverbanks, sincerity, a fluid utensil, the silver in the soap, the hand grabbing for the sinking ring, blacksmith's bullets, silver served over rice, breath, the need to breathe, vascular and alive, toes reaching for the stones in the lake, liquid silver spoon, do not trip, speech of men about their work. Try the river as a diet of road, thin utensil, minimal aluminum, momentary importance is Cambridge men who correct themselves, so Emerson-like, begin again. Okay, this is a poem that I gave to Misha's class, and it was in Best New Poets 2012, so I thought I would go ahead and read this one here tonight. It's called, well, I guess I should give you a little background. I write these poems about people who have odd jobs, and I kind of relate their experience doing that work as the work becomes more antiquated with the work of doing a poet. So trying to get a little bit more in touch with myself through writing about these strange people that I kind of get inside their brains. So this is called Months After the Crash, the Blind Aerobatic Pilot Speaks. Black box, my secret kin before the nosedive jammed my body into the hat. I was no eel when I hit the ocean's surface. Now I am land with the braille, cattle under my fingers this summer, my body on the mattress, sweat drying into pounds, as blank a house inside as out. I am suitcases in a tremendous sea, the exterior part of a vehicle in this absurd custom of missing myself like a radio program once recorded live. I met a young man who lost his leg in battle, and he said, distinct from his substance, his name saved him, worn thing. Blood can't be stored for more than 42 days, but my vision still reds out in rapid climbs, inverted spins, Cuban eights. In remembrance, I get outside a bottle of whiskey, back on the outside of the curve, amphitheater turned inside out, no possibility of grabbing the door handle and feeling someone turn it from the other side. No possibility of translating flight dry and husky when the side of the wing is in line with the rest of the world. Upper limit, my face whitening, a breaker in air. In 1932, the Royal Air Force trained men to fly with a hood over the cockpit, take off, turn over, spin and dive, straighten out blind. A wave covered in mud, mud covered in waves, shells covered in mud must slide in paths visible for tenths of a second, blindness begetting blindness. A jet passing open-jawed, making paste of birds at the speed of men, gathering acres in a radar nest, turning like a sparrow entering through a window, mistaking the space between floor and ceiling for sky. Okay, and I thought I would also read a little bit of prose. I also write prose. And so this is not a piece I've done that much out loud, except to myself. And it's about when I was living in this northern city in Japan called Kushiro, and it was foggy for 22 straight days. And you couldn't see, you'd look out, sometimes it was like you couldn't see your hand, and sometimes you could barely see, but it never lifted. And so I was trying to write about that experience a little bit. So this is called A Foreigner at the Threshold of Fog. And I have a couple of quotes to begin. Kushiro is known as the city of mist, and this is certainly true a lot of the time, around 100 days of the year, when the city is blanketed in a thick mist, causing much of the city to disappear. The city has flourished as a port city and is home to one of Japan's largest fishing fleets. It's from the All Japan Guide. And then I have this quote from Thomas Carlyle's The Hero as Divinity. We call that fire of black thundercloud electricity, and lecture learnedly about it, and grind the like of it out of glass and silk. But what is it? What made it? Whence comes it? Whither goes it? Science has done much for us, but it is a poor science that would hide from us the great, deep, sacred infinitude of nescience, whether we can never penetrate, on which all science swims as a mere superficial film. Every object still verily is a window through which we may look into infinitude itself. And so this is the first section. Fog on the 16th straight day. Up against her 5th floor window is the fog, white acreage of the city's backside. Her gaze is pushed into it so hard she can see her features in the window pane. She is the airplane's nose, pressing into the space where white emerges from white, pressing into the shapes of the far distant, the distracted, cloudy imbroglio that mythological women emerge from. She is distracted by it until she decides to open the window. Her hand is below the windowsill. She's lightly clutching a few tablespoons of saffron sent from abroad. She does not crush it. It moistens. It is avian. Here, some of the history of aviation. She is a puff, a ghost bird saying, "Spice sack, give me your tongue." To be a crepuscular ray, a bright saffron trail lashing through the fog, And then the arrival, crushed red and gold, a handful of rich spice falling 5 stories from her unclenched hand to the wet street. Dampened to spice paint on the sidewalk's chilled palate, the scent and taste of saffron, in this maritime blindness where stars are graying, where her hand, stained floral, pushes out the open window and moves the cloud that touches the ground. How fog situates her when she's frustrated. The invisible vending machine dispenses and dispenses at her cost, as if she's made of snow. She is an edge species, wrestling with another edge species, cars hissing past nearby. The foil wrapper extends to bind them up, like wet eyeballs. They are shelved, and the process repeats. Fog in the routine of cooking. She knows that the fog's color matches the white of the flag, so she expects only the slight red circle in the center to appear when the fog thins a degree, offering the slightest hint of visibility. And surely, by mid-afternoon, the sunlight bathes off a layer of the fog's body and she can see it, the circle a soft machine's eye at the end of the pier, looking. The window, a cyclops, her cue for a late lunch. In the kitchen, she picks up a flat yellow box from the countertop, looks for numbers on the back, 350, 2. Thinks, directions for curry, 350 milliliters water, 2 cubes of curry. Adds water to a saucepan, rips open one end of the box, slides out the brown plastic tray, pops out 2 cubes of curry and puts them in the pan. The safest bet, she thinks, is to heat over medium and stir with a wooden spoon. How she equates fog with winter. During the colder months, when visiting a cemetery, she cannot smell the people interred beneath the marble headstones. She feels memory bound in the marble and can't release it, doesn't want to fabricate its stories. Yet the headstones are so close to one another that several of them seem to share the space of one breath. She goes home and places a smooth, clean stone at the bottom of a glass of chilled, iceless gin. Other days, when it is very cold, she puts a pickled plum, called umeboshi, in a glass of hot water, oyu, and Japanese liquor, shochu. The Japanese terms sound like warming, the soft process of a face in light, a face that appears warm but is never touched. She drinks it, umeboshi, oyu, shochu. In the morning, she pulls up the blinds, light fog emerging with each disappearing slat, a salty flower blooming in her throat with each blink. A gull lands in the river and is seized by the current, a cork on a line. Nearby, fishermen unpunctuate the river and pack their catch into styrofoam coolers. Silver commas, stopped commas. Leftovers, she thinks, for us to eat. Fog after exiting a windowless downtown bar at 3 a.m. She's looking at what's still open, one out of every few shops, the convenience stores, cinema white light at the source, extending out, at its furthest reach, the color of fog, the hostess bars, windows shiny and opaque as beetlebacks, groups of salarymen entering and exiting, the shapes of their bodies, the only difference between them, their half-unbuttoned white shirts thinned by wrinkles, black slacks and atmosphere around their legs. Hostesses encircle them on the sidewalk as posts in a moving corral, framing the group, fawning over them, their tight violet silver obsidian dresses popping around the loose male-scented nucleus, manila folders wrapped in smoke and copier ink. The pachinko parlors, lights dinging in time with bells, 1,000 fishtails pounding against the side of a great aluminum container, whipping, nothing else left. More salarymen passing with cans of beer, maybe going gambling, going to another one of the hundreds of hostess bars, going home to eat microwaved rice while their wives move around in the background. She's feeling like an orange, plucked. The stem releases, her body gains density, packed inside herself, released, bending over, rupturing into the sewer, a fruit grown too quickly in the swarming tree of city fog. Fog and communication. Breathing the city's air. The fog makes the air more local, taints it with a false sense of companionship. She takes her mind to it, divides it into an infinitude of breaths. She can't leave it alone. She's made air into something that can wait for her. has made herself into a door. At any moment, she can shut herself, stop breathing. Still, whole oceans are traversable. Building a hallway, she's a hallway down to a door, and then a door, and come knocking on herself, several times a day, finding herself in a robata with one counter and 9 stools, 6 middle-aged salarymen on one side and one elderly couple on the other. She's staring at a plate of wood-skewered chicken and green peppers with a conversation in her mouth, watching more skewers turning over charcoal, charring, juicing, smoke pouring out of the vents and the crack in the sliding door, wondering what everyone else is eating, what craggy shellfish is bubbling and firming on the grill. Eventually, to be asked a question, to surface up from underneath a composition of Japanese sounds, to enter it, Japanese clocks swinging on hooks, voices, the many syllables it takes to thank someone, the cadence of buying liquor at the convenience store. Twilight, fog on a prickling cover of frost, 100 variations on ticking white. Fog and whiskey walking. She leaves her apartment after several glasses of whiskey, dusk-born. Coffee plants could grow from her body, push forth a harvest of dark beans, rich and oily. She's the curl and snag of broken shingles cutting through the fog, mud a paste under her boots. She's strong, laced with alcohol, taking diagonals across parks, heating stunted buds on the trees. She turns inward towards the city center, passing a convenience store, its long window. Inside, the aisle of whiskey and shochu, the salarymen staring at schoolgirl manga near the magazine rack, their bodies limp against the half erections in their dark slacks. Their constant coming and going, an entire phylum attracted in cycles to the light under the sheet, the convenience store in the fog. On the refrigerated shelves behind the men, a diminishing quantity of onigiri, those throughout the day pulled like pixel from a fluorescent screen, a proper measure of time, in the consumption of salmon roe and pickled plums nestled in sticky rice and wrapped in nori, stocked every morning for the taking. She's become hungry. She walks towards the area in the middle of town with the crowded robata, rows of them in warm, unpaved alleys, fog-filled, a match for the nestled flux beyond the sliding wood doors. The alleys absorb the voices and drinks splashed on the floor during conversation, making a heart under the dirt. Her usual debate, a point of entrance, contemplating the mostly illegible kanji calligraphied on soft flags over the doors, their colors, the faded bindings of books, the waving of wilted reds, stretched blues, pearly greens. And beyond the doors, laughter that might be too intimate to approach. She might not have a choice if she went inside. She might have to talk. In another case, she might ruin the conversation. Stopping at a door, filtering mild mumbling, an old woman and some men. The whiskey on her breath merges with the fog. She stands and breathes, her breaths meeting again and again in indecision, but then she pulls the door open on its runners. The scooting of squat wooden stools and the shifting of shoes on the concrete floor split the alley air briefly before she closes the door behind her, bumping the fog back outside, making way for the sound of expensive charcoal burning like guitar strings popping inside the charcoal itself. Muted, making the charcoal lighter, lifted, glass of stone, the smoke curls, music out of the destruction of an instrument. She says good evening to the old woman behind the counter, konbanwa, and regards 3 men holding chopsticks at separate levels of greeting, all in some midst of plucking fresh oysters out of tall, unglazed, dark clay cups. Learning that those oysters are lightly coated in rice vinegar and called kaki soup. The last one. Fog and the boats in her ears. She waits for the sound of boats. The fog is too thick for her to see the vessels as they approach and pass, vessel after vessel, like notes in a player piano. After some time, she notices that each note, once struck, enters into its own length of rumble, strength, departure. In this way, in the way that the note of each vessel acts as 2 fingertips pulling a thread from the spindle of the river, the way each boat becomes bare, surviving, she must accept that the vigor of water behind the boat is separate from the boat itself, and also that she must keep her ear tuned to the vigorous part, so that the boat's body may be truly realized. After one of the boats passes, she tries to hear the water beyond the cotton in her eyes, lets the river rise until there's a blind flood, a cipher. Enough water makes holes appear all at once. She can hear where the storm drains are, the window frames, can hear the river rushing through, over, and then she can see it bursting into the grocery store, ripping across the surface of the all-weather rug, lifting cans of food from the shelves, raising dead fish from their beds of shaved ice, organizing a herd that could run over a hill and take a man out, weak as a lone reed. She takes away the sound and can still see. Yellow price tags swirling like grace notes and the river miming the lines of the body she wants, the body of powerful extension, the body of myth. She thinks of botulism, lids bulging on jars, jars full of botulism carried by the flooding river. There, to be overcome, to extend a sting into a greater opening, to make real the mirage. She thinks her body must be more alive now that she can see the world aflood. Thinks about bees crawling out of a crack in the wall, come from somewhere, when the weather's warm enough. Thinks about the golden marsh near the river, flooding to a slick, a dance floor upon which the body becomes a specter on its way to becoming edible, the center of a moment, a body that fits inside the mouth in a single bite. Thank you.
The world's largest poet visits rural Idaho. His 300 pounds on his 6'11" frame will not fit into the Dean's VW waiting at the bus station. He must wait again while a 40-mile round trip brings another car. At the Pine Tree Motel, the world's largest poet piles baggage on the underlength bed, naps on blankets on the tile floor. That evening, a low table, his only podium, he ducks and squints to read his poems. Both he and his hosts are aware of all this. They have him for the glaciers and wild birds that spring from his giant fingers. He's there because the battered humming in his head will not stop. Thank you, Misha, for doing this. It's a wonderful thing. The second most difficult audience to read for is a room full of writers. I learned this early in my career when I had the fortune and misfortune to get to read to a giant room full of writers at the Bread Loaf Writers Conference. The toughest audience to read for is one that's full of your family. And we kind of have both here tonight. And there's two ways you can approach that family problem. You can pretend they're not here and just go forward, or you can kind of latch onto it. And I've decided that I would do the latter this evening. I could be wrong about this. If I am, you can check with me afterwards, and don't shout it out now. But I don't think very many bankers go and visit the graves of other bankers. But it's a thing that artists do. It's a thing that writers do. And I was visiting Emily Dickinson's grave in Amherst, Massachusetts, and I'll bet a lot of money that there's at least one other person in this room who's done that. And her marker says simply, "Called back." And at a time after I was there, I was just thinking strangely, and it occurred to me that the lifespan of Emily Dickinson and the lifespan of my father were almost exactly a century apart. And that led to this. Called Forward. Dale B. Corey, 1925 to 1985. Emily Dickinson, 1830 to 1886. Other poets to my father's grave most certainly have never come. To Dickinson's Amherst kingdom, iron fenced, they've trudged in iambic waves. And so I owe my poem to him, yet pay it now to her, most fierce in genius, cold and warm and sparse, who speaks above his silent din. She saw his face and bones, born then gone, century and century beyond her. She spoke his love, his chill, his stupor. She taught me grief is tongueless, gave me song. That grief is tongueless is Dickinson's words. I have 4 daughters. One actually, others in spirit. I wrote this poem some time ago, and after the fact, it became part of a sort of ridiculous project that I have going on having to do with William Shakespeare. But I wanted to read this one. I assume general familiarity with the play. If you happen to know the play well, you will know that I catch a few things here and there. This is for my daughter Miranda. It's called The Tempest. If you name your daughter Vision or Wondrous to Behold, you should not be surprised if she comes to you in anger or in shame, wishing to be known as Mary or Anne. That will be the moment to carry her out to the things of the world she is not, speaking other sounds that were almost hers. Aspen, lily white, cumulonimbus glow. Soon enough, she'll realize the world too often gets named in hope of profit or deceit or the scientist's exactitude. But on the greening island of the family, testing its voice in the months of waiting, the sought-after words are music and the past. Grandparent, aunt, child deceased. Spirits of fashion and monsters of commerce lurk, bedfellows eager to keep us from our own best inventions and songs. Some days it seems we grow from wailing silence into speech, only that we might curse the coming return to silence. But if you've named your daughter wondrous to behold, she'll someday learn she heard those words before all others, and then again and again. When you are gone, beyond all roaring, she'll know, should you ever brave return, which words are the first you'll speak. Any of you who have written know, or I trust that you know, that what you write comes from who knows where, can come from anywhere. That first poem about that big poet came from looking at the Guinness Book of World Records. Sometimes my poems come out of my life in direct ways. Sometimes they come out of it indirectly. Sometimes they have nothing to do with it except spiritually or emotionally. This is one of those poems that was born of an actual experience, but it got created actually partly because of the experience and partly because there was a time in my writing life, and this was much after the experience, that I had been somehow writing longer and longer poems and decided that that wasn't necessarily such a good idea, and so I was going to make myself write some small poems. And I got this notion when I was in a hotel room and looking at those little pads of paper that they leave you in the hotel rooms. Some of them are square, but in some hotels they're long and skinny. And I decided that I would try and write some poems that couldn't be any longer than what I could type on one of those little pieces of paper. I didn't have to keep the shape, but and this particular poem became after the fact kind of a title poem for this group of poems that I wrote. And it's called Poems of This Size. In poems of this size, so little might happen. One wonders if such brevity can matter. As when I strolled 30 years ago with my wife, a year before she was my wife, in our first neighborhood. And we heard that familiar, horrible squealing of tires down the block. And because she was a young nurse, no doctor in sight, when we reached the small boy lying on the red brick street with many people gathered round, she had to step forward and kneel, had to be the one cradling him and wondering most closely how quick and full an end can be. This next one I'm going to read for you, nobody's seen it or read it or heard it or knows of it, except a few people in this room. Because it's a piece that I wrote sort of deciding that it would, that it would just remain not a private piece, but one that I wasn't going to be trying to send off out into the world the way I do most of my poems. This is a poem for one of my granddaughters. She doesn't know about it yet, because she's only 3 now, or almost 3. So I thought I would. I haven't read this out loud anywhere. I'm hoping I can do it, but I was looking at it and thinking, well, maybe we can do that. It's called Sierra, and it's for my daughter Miranda, who is Sierra's mama, and her daddy Travis, and eventually for Sierra. And it starts with a dictionary definition. A noun, Spanish, out of the Latin serra, a saw. A range of hills or mountains having a saw-toothed appearance from a distance. And smart readers that you, and listeners that you are, you'll pick up some threads from the Tempest poem. And so again, as always, we must make our own truths, believing more in music than hard definition or history. When we have wanted for so long, that want becomes a fear, becomes what we've lost by never having it. And so at first we fear the getting, the having. Then know we must name a right to claim, to hold on minute by minute to the word made love. Saw-toothed? Hardly. In truth, at first, toothless. No appearance, just soft reality. And certainly no distance is involved in this closest, most constant of looking at what was one's self hidden. Is oneself now fully in the open of that want with her habitation, her name, Sierra. No range, no plurals, just the one, Sierra.
Made me cry. Thanks.
You're welcome. It's good for you. My daughter, who is most not here, is in Africa. She's also my writer daughter. So I'm going to read this poem. This is for Rebecca. It's called My Daughter Playing Beethoven on My Chest. She was 9, on the absolute edge between her dying childhood and that confusing ecstasy to come, then go in another decade's rush. We were simply chattering, I seated and she standing before me, she spinning those silly child's nonsense tales, still lingering, circular, repeating jabberings, a part of me laughs and loves to hear, though often I am quickly bored, annoyed, wishing to escape the wishing her fantasy of words and voices means, when suddenly her hands came forward and up, spread like claws, or the reach of a smaller child, playing ghosts or monsters. But her fingers kept coming and lit upon my chest, ever so briefly still, then launched into a spidery dance of side to side, of up and down. Beethoven's Ode to Joy thrummed above my lungs as if she were typing out a secret, well-known message. No, I could not decipher that music's motion, upside down and silent. She hummed as well, her fully childish voice releasing that long-ago tale of maturity, as if it were the simplest thing of all to offer up the musings of a genius. What she played, I could not play. My hands from earliest days, fat hams stuck to the platter of my thinking. Music's flags and circles, a Russian I could not read. But I'd had ear enough to follow the lead of her growing fingers at 7, then 8, then 9, on the keys, which led to hammers and wires and board, which had lifted sound through our every room and wall. This daughter's not here. I kind of thought she would be, but then we found that we all screwed up and she didn't even know what was happening. But I'm going to read this anyway because her old English teacher from high school is here. This is a way back poem for my oldest daughter, Heather. And it grew, as things sometimes do, from something she said to me. It's called My Daughter's Night. Think about lying in bed, little kid. My daughter's night. Bees in the ceiling's corners. Tree shadows on your fingers and sheet. You lie awake from evening to dawn. Your little sister sleeps beside you while strings of black air push through the window screen to tangle with voices from walls and drop quivering in a dark mass on the dresser across the room. Though you are nearly 7, you won't believe you sleep. How do I explain what I cannot show you? What if you are right? Perhaps while my nights are elsewhere, you know the dark as being here. Your pillow rushes against your ear like the ocean shell in your closet. You lie in thought until the daylight brings us to you from our vast waste of sleep. When you're old, what will matter? That you were always awake, or that you could never dream? And I will finish by coming back around to the poets. And I won't mind if you want to buy a book from me. You can check with me later. This is called How Poets would have us know them. As we read calligraphy, where pressure, angle, and nib free beauty from sense. As we shiver to the voice of a certain singer, always wanting more, never mind the words. As we rise to a lover's hand as it nears, though we do not know what the stroke this time will be. Though the lover may be gone, the hand in our dreams alone. Thank you.
Come back. I have to present you. We have gifts. We come bearing gifts. No cash. Don't get too excited. I'll just, I don't want to stay too long, but I wanted to tell you we brought, for each poet, Katie, would you help me with getting the other one? That would be awesome. The College of Education supports this event with a mug. No, I'm just kidding. Dean Marshall, no, they support it in many ways. They allow me to do this, which is so wonderful. And a pen, which actually has written on it, College of Education. We present them to you. And each poet, I don't know if 30 years in Athens at the Georgia Review counts as a new turn in the South, but I think the poems do, and certainly our newest member to the Georgia Review, maybe you're the newest member to the Georgia Review, yes. So we've also purchased for them this delicious cookbook by Hugh Etchison, which reads like poetry, so I hope that you'll do some cooking. And this is the time for Q&A. If you have a burning question, now's the time to let me know. I happen to have 3, so I'll start. But signal, wave me down if you have this, I need to ask something, I want to ask something. I'm looking around the room, but I've started. Yeah, do you want water? You're good. So I'm going to just get out of the way after I ask these questions. But I wanted to ask you, I think that it's a really difficult balancing act that you do. I'm not sure if this is not good theater. 3/4 out, then move the mic back. There's only one mic, this is a problem. Being an editor and being a writer seem like they could be antithetical. Being a teacher and being a writer seem like they could be antithetical. There's hardly any time. You're putting so much into other people's words and care in teaching others that I'm interested in I'm interested in how, of course, in the context of our course, educators navigating time for their own artistic practice and nurturance of their own literacy, and how that might parallel with how you as editors also nurture your writing and what the relationship is between your writing and your work as editor. So I'm going to give you back the mic.
I know you know the answer.
I think there's so many answers to it.
Well, you give one, I'll give one.
Okay, well, I think for me it's partly that if I have a bad day editing a piece, which would mean that I can't get my brain into it, but I need to do it and I need to tune up that voice and I need to do the correct thing for that author's work. Like it's such a heavy responsibility to be offered somebody's work to make it streamlined and to make it be the very best that it can be. I'll get stuck on a sentence for, sometimes embarrassingly like an hour and try to make that happen. And at the end of that process, sometimes I find that I'm totally inspired to write, which is then hard because then I have to keep working. But other times I can't. I'm stuck in the place of that piece. So I think that just speaks to sort of the power of writing itself. That you never know what's going to turn out the backside of the task that you're doing. Which is to be very careful in all senses. I think as an editor, I can't remember the little tiny poem that there's a poet, Lorraine Niedecker, and she writes about being in a condensery. Like the act is always to bring the the word down to that place. And I think that whether you're editing or writing, like you're in that condensery, and that's like where the two come together. So that would be my answer to that.
Okay, well, two things. There's the time thing, which is fairly simple, which is the job along with everything else in your life is something you do other than directly writing. And so, yeah, it gets in the way because it's sort of endless and you need lots of time to write and you don't have that. But the other part of it has to do with writing itself, and in that regard, I have myself convinced that the editorial work I do is very good for my writing because Jenny was kind of referring to working on something that we're getting ready to publish. My mind is flashing to all those things that we're very definitely not getting ready to publish, and telling myself day after day after day that I want to make my work be such that no other editor looks at it and has some of the reactions that I have to some of the things that I look at that come into our office. Keeping the bar and the stakes very high for myself.
So speaking of the bar high and what you look for and what you don't want to appear ever in the journal, we have a group here of writers, the class, but probably other people in the back around the room who are writing. So, all right, we want to know what you want to print. What do you want to publish? What makes for a good poem, please? What's the secret recipe?
Jenny definitely knows that.
Nope, you answer that.
Okay, I don't know what I want to publish because you haven't given it to me yet. I know what I have wanted to publish. And one of the critical things about anything that you end up loving is that it is in some way or ways different from, distinctive from what you've seen before. And as far as getting ready to try and write that thing, well, I mean, obviously part of it traces probably all the way back to things you couldn't do anything about, like when you were born. And then there's the education part of it, which, and actually this goes back to what I was saying at the end of my first response about having the bar for yourself high enough, recognizing what the stakes are, and if you're not profoundly well educated and don't want to be profoundly well educated and tremendously passionate about whatever kind of writing you want to do, the chances are you're not going to get there. I mean, one of the crazy analogies that I like, I've spent well, I don't do it anymore, unfortunately, but a whole lot of my life I would spend part of my days playing basketball, right? I loved to do that. And I was kind of solidly mediocre and had fun. It never would have occurred to me to try and get on a bus and go to New York or Chicago or someplace and walk out on the court during the Bulls or the Knicks practice and say, "Hi, could I try out?" If you want to be really good, then you've got to get yourself ready to be there, and you got to recognize how many levels there are, and how many possibilities. And I can guarantee you that there are a whole lot of people who just sort of, this isn't being nasty, this is just being realistic. There are a whole lot of people who just sort of think, well, if they write something down, then, okay, that's gonna work, that's gonna go out there. They don't know what anybody else is doing, they don't know what's been done. So I think it's awareness and talent and hard work.
Well, I mean, I guess just to add to that really briefly, I think there's something else too, just to say that there's this Russian formalist, and Viktor Shklovsky, and he says art exists to make the stone stony again. And so I think that when something happens for me where the stone is suddenly stony, but everybody has that. Like, we're all wearing different outfits and we're all doing different things, and sometimes you just have to trust in yourself that you do have an independent vision. There's a graphic designer down in Miami. His name is Evan Hecox, and I don't know about his formal training or what he's looked at, but he does line drawings and things with. We'll take like a dilapidated van or like an underpass on a highway, and it's something that would be typically very ugly. And his thing is that if you can't see any beauty here, then a large string of expletives. You need to be able to sort of to really try that, but also to trust yourself to make the steps necessary to get the writing done, to try to do it.
Glad you figured out that this moves and I don't have to keep moving. That's very helpful. It'll be very useful next week when we'll be here Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday for more goodness. Please come back. I have a last question, but I'm scanning. Anyone may I go proceed? I will proceed. So this teachers, poetry, well, my first thought was, how do we as poets, publishers of good writing, as writers, keep it current and necessary for other people to keep writing, to keep subscribing to the Georgia Review? What are you doing in your
Good
practice?
job.
Pardon?
Good job.
Yeah?
Should sneak that in.
Subscribe to the Georgia Review. Now yours. No, but really, as I said last night, we have just learned poetry has been ousted from the state standards, so teachers no longer have a requirement to teach writing poetry. If it's in the curriculum, it's to teach a haiku or an acrostic as a marginal activity. Maybe it's done in April after testing has been completed, you know what I mean? So, and that's your business, so I just interested in your response and what you would say to teachers, K-12 and beyond, literacy teachers, about poetry.
Want me to go first? No? Okay. Well, first of all, I'm just totally pissed off. I didn't realize that had happened. But I also read a recent account about a charter school. Of course, I cannot remember what city it was in, but the arts had been cut from that school, and they'd taken that funding and gotten security guards and metal detectors and all those supposedly necessary things. The principal switched at that school, and they took out all of the principal made the decision to take out all the security guards and all the metal detectors and reinstitute the arts. And the violence in the school disappeared. And so that would be my answer to why that's necessary if you want just to see results of what kids feel like when they're able to learn how to express themselves and to find that individuality that you can't often find through finding the right answer, because there is no right answer. And so that would be my sort of basic question to why we need to be teaching those sorts of things.
I think that was probably the answer, but it occurs to me that one of the favorite books in my rather hectic library is a book, a little anthology that was published about 40 years or so ago by the University of Chicago Press. And it's called Most Ancient Verse, and it is translations of what are at least called poems in the book from ancient Egypt and Sumeria, going back several thousand years, as sort of as close as it seems anybody can get to the beginnings of language. And it would appear that somehow one of the first things that began to emerge from the earliest language was this thing that we now call poetry, which I guess we might, for the moment, define as compressed, thoughtful, attention-paying language. And I would suspect that if it's been around for all that time, it's going to take a little bit more than a legislative group to knock it off. That doesn't mean that it gets any easier. We push on.
And on that note, give it up for these two fine boys. But I wanted to thank the College of Education for allowing me to do this and their great support, particularly Jim Marshall, Michael Child, Jen Williams, and artistic tech guru Ron Braxley in the back. I also want to thank my department head, Bob Fetcho, and the entire Department of Language and Literacy Education and my program from which I hail, TESOL and World Language Education. I also want to thank all the poets that have read in this series. Starting with Judith Ortiz-Kofer, Stephen Corey, our greatest fan right there of the Georgia Review, and Jenny Graub-Hess, also of the Georgia Review, Laura Newbern, Jericho Brown, and Tamara J. Madison. I want to thank Johan Huang for his extraordinary assistance in all things, including the beautiful flyer that you may have seen, which brought you here upstairs. Jim Woglum for his artistic support as well. Woodland Farms and Roots Farm for providing us with some amazing locally grown fresh vegetables to nourish us this week. And Tlaloc Restaurant, which helped us nourish us today. Wonderful, authentic Mexican cuisine. Of course, the Georgia Review, an awesome literary, nationally famous literary magazine in our very hometown. Subscribe, subscribe, subscribe. The English Literature and Creative Writing programs at UGA, WUGA, for featuring many of our poets on the radio this week and to be rebroadcast in September. Of course, these featured readings will all be broadcast on the College of Education YouTube channel, so you can look forward to that. Ron is to credit for all of that, and so you can Google Misha's Poetry Podcast or College of Education YouTube channel podcast, and you can see all the readings if you missed any of them. And of course, this reading tonight will also be on air. I've already thanked these wonderful students in the class, Georgia teachers everywhere for the creative work they do. And of course, one other thing I forgot to mention is that we have taken poetry field trips many of the days of our course to inspire new writings. And I want to give a shout out to Katie and Lakeisha at the vet school who helped tour and guide us and inspire some animal poems you might hear. Ann Myers Devine at the Hargret Rare Book and Manuscript Library, whose documents have inspired some of the poems tonight. Andrea Swigert from Evolutionary Biology, who taught us a great deal about the monkey flower and genetics at the beautiful botany lab on campus. The Green Acres Pool, where we swam today, some of us. And I also wanted to let you know that if you want to be a part of our group, we want you to be a part of our group. I have started a Facebook page called Poetry for Educators, but it's also for our friends. I think educator and education is a term we can all feel a part of in many ways. We are a part of education, broadly speaking, so please sign up, Poetry for Educators. You just go to that group, and it's a closed group, but it's open to anyone, and we welcome you there.